All right, Andrea, you can go ahead and begin.
Welcome to today's telephone town hall conversation with Senator John Walsh. I'm Andrea Helling, Senator Walsh's Deputy Chief of Staff. We're going to be discussing the issues important to you. So if you have a question at any time during the event, please press 0 on the call. Right now we're dialing out to thousands of people from around Montana to join the conversation. In just a moment, we'll be hearing from Senator Walsh and taking your questions live. If you're just joining us, this is Senator John Walsh's live telephone town hall conversation with folks across Montana. In a moment, we'll hear from the Senator on the work he is doing in the Senate and on his travel around Montana. Throughout the call, if you have a question you'd like to ask Senator Walsh, press 0 to get in line. Senator Walsh will take as many questions as possible. In just a moment, we're going to start taking your questions live. If you have a question, please press 0 to get in line. Before we do that, however, we want to do a quick poll of everyone on the call to find out a little bit more about your priorities. What do you think is the most pressing issue Senator Walsh should be addressing in the Senate? Press 1 if it's unemployment in the economy. Press 2 if it's taking care of our veterans. Press 3 if it's the federal debt. Press 4 if it's expanding access to public lands. Press 5 if these issues are of equal importance. 1 if it's unemployment in the economy. 2 if it's taking care of our veterans. 3 if it's the federal debt. Press 4 if it's expanding access to public lands. Press 5 if these issues are of equal importance. Thanks for participating tonight. And with that, I will turn it over to Senator Walsh. Senator Walsh, thanks for joining us this evening.
Thanks, Andrea, and good evening, and thanks for joining me tonight. We've got folks on the line from around Montana, and I'm going to open it up to some questions in just a moment. So if you'd like to ask a question, press 0 now to get in the queue. There are a lot of challenges our country needs to deal with, from bringing jobs back to America and making sure folks have the training they need to compete in our 21st century economy, to protecting our public land access while making smart decisions about responsible energy development. I'm proud to say I'm tackling all of these challenges. Again, if you're just joining us, this is Senator John Walsh. I'm holding a live telephone town hall with folks from across Montana. If you'd like to ask a question tonight, please press 0 now. Congress just passed an important measure to keep our government open. Last year's disastrous government shutdown cost Montana $45 million, all because folks in the House of Representatives didn't want to compromise. This year, we were able to avoid that. But I'm disappointed politics again got in the way of governing, and Congress kicked the can down the road for another 2 months. However, this temporary solution is better than last year's devastating government shutdown. This funding package keeps our public lands open, continues support for critical disease research, and allows vital programs to keep operating for our veterans, seniors, and working families. The package we passed also included important assistance to combat the growing threat of ISIS. When Congress returns to work in November, I'm hopeful we will have a meaningful conversation about America's role in leading a coalition of countries to protect our national security. Again, if you're just joining us, this is Senator John Walsh. I'm holding a live telephone town hall with folks from across Montana. If you'd like to ask a question, please press 0 now. The lack of timely access to care for our nation's veterans is something that I'm deeply concerned about. When men and women enlist in our nation's armed forces, we make them a promise that the VA will be there when they need them. The revelations of inexcusable long wait times and secret lists is simply unacceptable. Accountability lies with the President and Congress, which has an obligation to fully support America's veterans. My call for the creation of a special, independent, and bipartisan commission on care, similar to the 9/11 Commission and the Dole-Shalala Commission that investigated Walter Reed under the Bush administration, was included in the VA reform bill that Congress passed this summer. And I'm hopeful this independent commission will provide much-needed oversight to the VA. I'm pushing for the commission to include folks who understand rural America. One of the very first bills I wrote when I got to the Senate was to tackle the alarming rate of suicide among our nation's veterans. We are losing 22 veterans every single day to suicide. My Suicide Prevention Act for America's Veterans has bipartisan support in both the Senate and now in the House. I'm proud to be working with Senators Lisa Murkowski and Mark Kirk, both Republicans, Congressman Jeff Miller, and a Republican from Florida, and Congressman Tim Walz, a Democrat from Minnesota, on this important legislation. Since we started the much-needed conversation on suicide prevention for our veterans, important steps are already being implemented, which include greater standardization between DoD and VA drug formularies, improved health record sharing between agencies, greater training to identify veterans at risk of suicide, a new focus on recruiting more mental health care providers, and accountability measures to track the success of the VA's mental health care programs. There is one piece of my bill that is yet to be acted on, and that is extending combat eligibility from the current 5 years to an extra 5 years so that veterans have longer to come forward to help with PTSD. If you're just joining us, this is Senator John Walsh. I'm holding a live telephone town hall with folks from across Montana. If you'd like to ask a question tonight, please press 0 now. I've been traveling around Montana and hearing from folks about what's on their minds. Everywhere I go, I hear about the importance of using Montana-made solutions to protect our clean air, clean water, and access to our public lands. Montana's public lands are a driver of our economy, and we need to do more to expand public access to public land. But I'm also fighting misguided attempts from Washington, D.C. to sell off our nation's public lands. Selling off our nation's public lands might sound good to out-of-state millionaires and billionaires, but it doesn't sound good to those of us who float on the Missouri River, backpack through the Centennials, or hunt along the Rocky Mountain front. Protecting our public land isn't just about making sure politicians in Washington don't sell it off. It's also about protecting access and keeping our national parks and wildlife refuges open if another government shutdown does happen. Tonight, I hope to hear directly from you, to hear your concerns and suggestions. Again, press 0 to get in line to ask a question. I look forward to our conversation, and with that, we'll go to questions. Andrea?
Thank you very much, Senator Walsh, and thank you all for participating tonight. If you have a question you would like to ask Senator Walsh tonight, press 0 to get in line. And we'll take as many questions tonight as possible. And to kick off our questions tonight, Senator Walsh, could you talk a little bit more about your vote in the Senate to give more resources to protect our national security from ISIS?
Yes, that's a great question. Last week, I voted along with 77 other senators to approve a resolution to fund the government until December and approve the President's request for funding to arm Syrian rebels and combat ISIS, the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. I shared the skepticism of many Montanans as ISIS launched its initial attacks this summer. I believe that Iraq needs to stand up for their own security. As ISIS has advanced across Iraq and has threatened the larger region, including potentially American homeland security, my concern has grown. The problem isn't just that ISIS is brutal and is beheading people. ISIS is also gathering resources to threaten Americans at home and abroad. I'm glad that the President laid out a strategy for addressing ISIS that does not include American boots on the ground. And when I say American boots on the ground, I'm talking about combat boots on the ground. Yet we do have boots on the ground, but they're not there in a combat role. So as part of our short-term response, I support helping train allies to contain and ultimately destroy ISIS. Believe me, the last thing I want to do is for America to get involved in another decade-long war in the Middle East. I believe Congress should have a full debate soon about the authorization to force this part of our responsibility under the Constitution. Thank you for that question.
Thank you very much for that answer, Senator Walsh. And if you'd like to ask a question tonight, please press 0, and we're going to take as many questions as we have time for tonight. Our first question from Montana this evening comes from Kalispell and comes from Sharon. Sharon, you are live on the line with Senator Walsh, and you can go ahead and ask your question.
Well, you may have answered it. My one concern was any movement that the Republicans may make on the funding bill to keep the government going. but I think you have addressed that question.
Well, Sharon, thank you for that question. I also want to highlight another act or bill that I've introduced, and it's termed as I term it the Cuts Act. And what that specifically will do is to reduce our deficit. The continuing resolution that passed last week will fund the government until December 11th. And I'm disappointed that Congress couldn't find the will to pass a full-year appropriations bill to make specific choices about our budget. We were gone. We left here Washington in early August and came back after the first week in September. We were here for approximately 2 weeks, and now we're gone until approximately November 12th. So I'm really disappointed that Congress doesn't take responsibility for its actions and solve the problems that we have at hand, such as passing a long-term budget. But what the Cuts Act will do is, since September 11th, 2002, we've spent over $2 trillion on contract services just in the Department of Defense alone. And so I've introduced legislation that will take the Department of Defense to take a look at their contract services and take us back to approximately the 2002 time frame. Because after spending 33 years within the Department of Military Affairs in Montana and working within the Department of Defense, I know that there are areas within defense that can be cut without having a negative impact on our national security. So I know that we have to cut. That Washington has a spending problem, and we have to do something about it, and that we're going to have to take cuts all across the various agencies. I do not support the way that we're doing it right now, and that is through sequestration. I believe that if when we identify what those cuts are with regard to a dollar figure, that we should tell the secretaries that, hey, Secretary of Defense, you've got to make a 10% cut or a 12% cut. Secretary of Interior, X% of cut, and let the secretaries make those decisions on where the cuts will come from. But I know we have to make some difficult decisions, and we shouldn't be going home on another 6 or 7 week break until those decisions are made. And as a matter of fact, most of my counterparts left Washington, D.C. Last Thursday evening. I'm still in Washington. So Sharon, thank you for that question.
Thank you very much, Senator Walsh. If you'd like to ask a question tonight, please press 0. Our next question also comes from Kalispell, and it comes from Doug. Doug, you are on the line with Senator Walsh. Doug, you're on the line, and you can ask Senator Walsh your question.
Oh, okay, then directly. I was wondering why in this age where, we happen to have almost energy independence and we're putting ethanol in our fuel, it's got a lower heat rating than the fossil fuels, but it also raises the price of not only our fuel, but also our crops to feed animals, which increase our meat prices and our general prices for other grains and things that our humans consume. Whether it's logical to continue the ethanol supplementation of our fuels, particularly unleaded gas and et cetera. Thank you very much.
You bet, Doug, and thanks for the question. First, I'd like to start off by saying that energy development in the Bakken, about 15% is in Montana, has been good for Montana and our energy security. But we don't just need more domestic oil. We also need to diversify with alternative fuels so that we aren't so dependent on just petroleum, which has a price that is tied to stability in the Middle East. I believe that advanced fuels produced from Montana products like homegrown algae, camelina, wheat, and barley can create new markets for Montanans and improve our energy security. Many don't have the problems of corn ethanol, which is what you're referring to. So I think that we need to continue to take a look at alternative energy sources so that we do not have to rely on energy from the Middle East. The last thing that I ever want to do is to send a young American to the Middle East to fight for fuel. But Montana oil is also good. The tax revenues that we are receiving from the oils from the Bakken are pretty significant, and they help our schools, they help our infrastructure, and they've been positive for Montana. Thanks, Doug, for that question.
Thank you very much, Senator Walsh. If you'd like to ask a question tonight, please press 0. Our next question comes from Mary in Helena. Mary, you are live on the line with Senator Walsh.
Senator Walsh, sir, I would like to say one thing about the public lands in America. America is a United States of America, and to sell off those public lands to any foreign country, no matter how good or whatever their ideas are in owning a piece of America, if they want to live in this country, from any country in the world, they should come here, become a United States citizen, sir, and study this land and study the history of how the freedom was fought and died for, and it should stand always as a united America, never to be owned one piece of it, not 1 acre or one piece of ground by any country in the world. We are the United States of America, sir, for all people willing to come here and learn the price of freedom and what the people paid for it to make it a country that it is stands in the world today.
Well, Mary, thank you for that comment, and I couldn't agree more. That our public lands are an important part of Montana's heritage, and we need to continue to fight to make sure that they remain part of our heritage. I've stood against efforts to cut off access, against efforts to develop on some of our public lands, because we want to make sure that those public lands remain beautiful. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to hike on the Rocky Mountain front, and I went with a group of Montanans as we climbed an elevation of about over 2,000 feet. And when we were standing up on top overlooking the Bob Marshall Wilderness, we need to do everything we possibly can to protect those lands, not only for our generation but for future generations. The outdoor industry in Montana provides about 60,000 jobs, and so it's a big boost to our economy. So I will continue to do everything I possibly can to support our public lands and make sure that the public lands remain public. What I really want to focus on is making sure that we continue to have access to our public lands. And we hear from a lot of people talk about that Montanans can manage this land better. But when we ask for specifics, there's not a lot of specifics out there. So that's really what I want to do, is I want to bring people to the table that have problems with the way that the land is being managed today, so we can solve those problems. Because I don't think, there's a lot of discussion about the public lands being turned over to the state would manage them. The state would not have the resources to manage the public lands that are currently being managed by the federal government. And then they would have to be sold off to the private sector. And so I really think that's the end game that a lot of people are after. You first turn them over to the public lands from the federal government to the state, and then from the state to private sellers. And I think if you're watching the newspapers and reading the editorials, you'll see that Montanans do not support turning our public lands over to the private sector. So thank you very much for that question, Mary, and thanks for your continued support of our outdoor heritage.
Thank you very much, Senator Walsh. If you'd like to ask a question tonight, we're still taking questions in our line, so please press 0 if you have a question you would like to ask Senator Walsh. Our next question comes from Dale in Anaconda. Go ahead, Dale, with your question for Senator Walsh.
Yes, Senator, this is Dale Eccleston, and I'm concerned about Forest Service leases on Forest Service property. They're so high, it's ridiculous. I'm wondering if you're working on any kind of a plan to help give us a little bit of benefits.
Dale, thanks for that question. And yes, I am. And I'm hopeful that this year we can finally solve this problem. I'm pushing, along with Senator Tester, to pass the bill that we wrote to keep the cabin fees sensible so that Montana families aren't forced to give up, multi-generation cabins. I know that many Montana families, like yours, have been affected by this, and we have a bipartisan bill, and we are trying to get it passed through the process now. And that's, again, one of the reasons that I'm really disappointed that Congress is going home for another 7 or 8 weeks, because when we have issues out there that are affecting Montanans, we should be back here solving these problems. You know, there are other Forest Service fees that should be lowered as well. So I am going to continue to work on this issue and for the remainder of my term, and I'm hopeful that we can come up with a solution, because I know that the tax increase that is being put on cabin owners and the fees, most Montanans will have to sell their properties. So and that's the last thing I want to happen. Thanks, Dale, for your question.
Thank you very much, Senator Walsh. Our next question comes from Missoula. Christopher, go ahead with a question for Senator Walsh.
Hello, Senator. I've got a question. What's going on with our veterans? I mean, these guys need to be taken care of.
Well, Dale, you're right, and I am a veteran. I served for 33 years in the Montana National Guard, and I commanded an infantry battalion in Iraq in 2004 and 2005. I like to say that over 700 of Montana's finest young men and women put their lives on the line for this country and for Iraq. And so, and not only for this generation of veterans, but for our veterans that fought in Vietnam. I believe that the President and Congress has let our veterans down, and we need to solve that problem. I'm happy we passed legislation on a bipartisan basis to address the outrageous backlogs, and happy that it included I inserted a piece in that legislation to establish a commission on care to begin taking an outside look on these perspectives. Also, I've introduced what's called the Suicide Prevention for America's Veterans Act to help address the veteran suicide that is happening in America today. We're losing 22 veterans a day by due to suicide. So, I'm just like to know, what are your thoughts on? Do you have any ideas on, Christopher, on what we could do to improve health within the VA healthcare system?
Senator Walsh, we're going to go to our next question. I think Christopher's back in the regular listening line. So our next question tonight comes from Donna in Kalispell. Donna, you are on the line with Senator Walsh. Oh, it looks like we've lost Donna, so we'll go to Reggie in Whitefish. Reggie, you are on the line with Senator Walsh.
First off, Senator Walsh, thank you for this forum. My question is, do you support efforts to get private money out of politics?
Reggie, we've got to do something to rein in the amount of money that is being spent on political races. So I fully agree that there is way too much money in politics. I was really disappointed the Senate blocked legislation to rein in the spending by corporations, and that we tried I think it was about a week and a half ago, we introduced legislation to overturn the Citizens United decision, and that was blocked in the Senate. But I do believe that we have to do something to get money out of politics, because I can tell you, after being here for a short period of time, and while I was running for a campaign, a significant amount of time that it could be used to work on legislation and solve the country's problems is being spent trying to raise money to run for election. And so we've got to come up with a better system that takes the large amounts of money out of campaigns and politics. So, Reggie, thank you for that question, and I support this issue.
Thank you very much, Senator Walsh, and we're still taking questions tonight, so if you have a question you would like to ask Senator Walsh that you have not yet heard, please press 0 to get in line. Our next question comes from John in Billings. John, you are on the line with Senator Walsh.
I'm curious, you hear me okay?
Yes, John, I can hear you fine.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm curious. I read a report in the National Geographic or someplace that there are proven reserves in the state of Montana and the Williston Basin in southern Canada. There's enough proven reserves there, which some of them in the national parks, enough proven reserves of oil to last the world for 1,000 years. And why don't we get busy in Montana and try to develop some of that? We have to build refineries and things instead of buying this stuff from the Far East people and giving them all our money.
Well, John, thank you for that concern as well. You know, today is an exciting time in the energy sector. You know, our energy security has significantly improved because of new domestic oil and gas. Our wind potential is increasingly being harnessed by wind farms, and new solar and coal technology are also being developed on a regular basis. So we are becoming much more energy independent in the United States, and we need to continue to move in that area. We are also coming online, and the U.S. is approaching energy independence because of new U.S. oil and gas that we are finding in the country. Montana refineries are expanding this year. You know, as you drive near the refinery in Laurel, you'll see expansions there, and other refineries are being expanded. And I know there are some plans out there for additional refineries in Montana. So we are moving in that direction, and I support natural resource development. I support building the Keystone Pipeline so that we can move more oil and reduce carbon emissions, and we'd move that oil safer through the pipeline than if we moved it like we are now on trucks and rail. So I strongly support the continued development of oil and natural gas into the state of Montana, and will continue to support that while I'm serving here in the United States Senate.
Thank you very much, Senator Walsh. Our next question comes from Judy in Great Falls. Judy, you are live on the line with Senator Walsh. Judy, you're on the line with us, and you can ask Senator Walsh your question.
Hey, yes, Senator Walsh.
Yes, Judy. How are you tonight?
Senator, I'm good. I have a question. Can they limit the amount of salt that elderly people are getting in nursing homes and assisted living?
Well, Judy,
like they do in schools?
That's something we could take a look at. This is the first time I've heard that this is an issue, but I can have my staff get back with you and find out where the problem is occurring, and we can take a look at it. Thank you.
Our next question tonight comes from John in Stevensville. John, you are on the line with Senator Walsh.
Hello, Senator Walsh. I'd like to talk to you about the gun factory. My wife works at a gun factory, and there are more gun factories coming into the state. My wife's worked at one for 20 years. They make good income. They employ a lot of people. There's more coming in the state. There's bullet factories here. Some of these businesses get contracts from the federal government that are used for some of these wars, and I'm wondering if there's any way Montana can encourage more of this. It's a relatively clean factory, and I think it would really help the economy of Montana if we could encourage the gun factories away from Massachusetts.
Well, John, first let me tell you that I am a very strong supporter of our Second Amendment. I've fought for our country, as has my oldest son. He's deployed twice, to protect our rights as gun owners. And I've written letters to Attorney General Holder to protect the rights of gun owners in Montana and across the country. But with regard to additional gun manufacturers moving to the state of Montana, I know that Governor Bullock and his administration are continuing to reach out across the country to encourage businesses to come to Montana to see what we have. And I know that he's been successful with a couple of, not necessarily gun manufacturers, but businesses coming to the state. And so I agree. I think that weapons manufacturing would be a good, clean manufacturing business to bring to the state. I know that gun manufacturing is always a great, strong part of our economy, especially in Montana. And small businesses like most Montana manufacturers are exactly the kind of entrepreneurs we need in the state of Montana. So I support that, and I will, I have spoke to Governor Bullock about this issue in the past to see if he has been reaching out to gun manufacturers and to see how that is going and if I can be of any assistance to him. So, John, thanks for your question.
Thank you very much, Senator Walsh. We're going to keep going with our call tonight, so if you have a question you would like to ask Senator Walsh, please press 0 to get in line. Our next question comes from Jim in Billings. Jim, you are live on the line with Senator Walsh, and you can ask your question.
Okay. This is Jim Tallman, and I've called a number of times to Max and Tester and the Air Department and asked about the Keystone Pipeline, and I always get a letter back with the same tired results that they're working on the wind and if we wait till we've got enough wind and electricity from the sun, we're all going to be froze to death. And I don't know why our government or our people are held hostage by Obama and the EPA. Can't you fellas do a little bit of something, or are we just going to wait till the Arabs shut us all off? Then we'll be waiting for the wind to blow, and we'll, like I say, we'll all be froze to death. And I know another gentleman named John had called in about that. And the letter I got from you, you did say that you were in favor of the pipeline, but how many more years is it going to take for a test and so forth? We really need this, and I think our whole future life depends on being independent. Those folks over there in Arabia, they don't like us. Thank you for your efforts. Bye now.
You bet, Jim. And again, I am supportive of the Keystone Pipeline. You know, this is a decision that is being held up by the President. And so I've introduced legislation to take the President of the United States out of the equation and to expedite the process and all future border infrastructure projects. That is, infrastructure projects across the U.S.-Canadian border have to be approved by the President. So my bill would take the President out of that decision-making process so that it doesn't get tied up in politics. You know, I believe this is a problem with red tape and the bureaucracy that we're dealing with. I'm frustrated too, and I think that we need to get moving with it because it is going to create, more jobs. It's going to be, we'll move that oil that's coming from Canada. It'll be moved much safer. It'll reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So there are enormous positives to building the Keystone Pipeline. And so I'm a strong supporter of it. I've been continuing to push the White House and the President to make a decision. But we can only do so much. He's the guy that will make the final decision and on his time frame. But I want you to know that we are continuing to pressure both he and the White House about making that decision as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Walsh. We're still taking questions, so please press 0 if you'd like to get in line. Our next question this evening comes from Linda in Kalispell. Linda,
yes?
You are on the line with Senator Walsh.
Thank you. Hello, John. It's good to talk with you, and I spoke with you in Kalispell when you were here. I appreciate your service to our country, and I know that you are very conservative about jumping into war again. I'm very concerned about our jumping into war in a very messed up situation in Syria, and I'm wondering if there aren't more efforts being made to use diplomatic and other financial strong arms to stop the funding of ISIS. We have so many allies, it seems, whose business people or even the governments themselves might be funding ISIS. And if we could stop that funding, we wouldn't have to use any of our military again and get into an extremely messy situation. I'd like to know what you think and what you know of those possible efforts. Thank you very much.
You bet, Linda, and it's good to talk to you again. I'm as concerned as well about getting involved in whether it's Iraq or Syria with American service members. I'm frustrated in that I helped train Iraqi soldiers, and I was disappointed when they ran away from ISIS, when ISIS moved into Iraq. I believe that Iraqis and others in the Middle East need to do more on their own. We can do so much, but we do not need to stop. We do need to stop the funding that ISIS is receiving to fund their training and equipping. Although I know right now that they are receiving a lot of their funding, illegally. They are doing, stealing oil off of from the pipelines and then selling that oil, and they're making millions of dollars a day off of that oil. So we need to begin freezing international accounts in different countries and others that are financing ISIS as well. Because again, the last thing I want to do is send American service members to the Middle East to fight for oil or to be fighting with ISIS. I believe that the Iraqis and the Syrians need to stand up and take responsibility for their own country, or not only the Iraqis and the Syrians, but all the countries in the Middle East need to stand up. That's where the problem is. I know that if the problem was here in the United States, we would be dealing with it. But that's what we don't want to happen. We don't want this problem to expand into the United States. So that's why we are concerned. I mean, the ISIS has made threats to the United States that it is going to do whatever it can to attack us on our homeland. So that's why we are concerned about ISIS and them continuing to grow and getting stronger with personnel and equipment. We need to make sure that does not happen. But I hear you, and I support using more diplomatic plans and diplomatic possibilities to solve this problems, as well as economic information and as a last resort, troops.
Thank you very much, Senator Walsh. If you have a question you would like to ask tonight, please press 0 to get in line. We're going to keep taking questions for a while longer. Our next question this evening comes from Robert in Bozeman. Robert, you are live on the line with Senator Walsh, and you can ask your question.
Yes, thank you very much. My wife and I are very concerned about security. We know what the situation is on the southern border. I want to ask you what we are doing, you and your party, to secure the northern border. We do know that we're facing an enemy that can transport people anywhere, anytime. And I am concerned that the border between the U.S. and Canada is porous. And I want to know what you and your specific party is going to do to secure that border for us. And if you'd like my explanation on it, after you've answered your question, I will give it to you.
All right, Robert. Well, I appreciate the question. I know that we need to secure the northern border. We know that there have been several terrorist plots that have tried to exploit the northern border, which, like you said, is very porous and it's not very well guarded right now. Again, it comes down to a matter of resources. We are focusing right now most of our attention on the southern border, and I believe that when we talk about immigration reform, securing our borders has to be a key part of securing both the northern and southern borders. But right now, the threats that we have been dealing with on the northern borders, we have been pretty successful at dealing with those threats. I know that we have used military assets on a pretty regular basis with radar and other types of equipment that detect people coming across the border where they shouldn't be coming across, and I think we've been very successful at that. But right now, I know that the focus is on the southern border. Not to say that there isn't a problem on the northern border, but we feel that we've been dealing pretty well with the threats that are coming across the northern border.
Thank you very much, Senator Walsh. Our next question comes from Bob in Bozeman. Bob, you are on the line with Senator Walsh. Go ahead.
Yeah, you caught me with a mouthful of food here. Hold on just a moment. So this is the second one of these town hall meeting forums that I've participated in. And the first one I thought was probably a campaign pitch of some sort, but I think evidently that's not the case now. And I find them kind of interesting. Interesting in a number of ways. The content's pretty interesting, although I don't agree with necessarily all of what you've said. Some of it I do, some of it I don't. But what I find really curious is why other politicians don't do this, particularly Senator Tester or any of the other major politicians in the state. This is a great forum for just general public participation. What's going on? How come you're the only guy that does this?
Well, Bob, I really appreciate that and that you've been involved in a couple of them. You know, I know that Senator Tester does do teletown halls like this and using the same format. Since I was sworn in February, I've done 24, and I believe myself and Senator Tester do. I can't tell you how many he's done, but I know he's done several. And I'll mention that he should do more soon because they are effective. We get the stats from these calls, and we reach out to several thousand people every time we do one of these calls. And really, the reason that I do them is because this helps me to gauge what Montanans are concerned about, so that when I make a vote on the floor of the United States Senate, I know how Montanans feel about a lot of these issues. And that's the same reason that when I go back to Montana, I very, very rarely travel to Helena, Montana, where my home is. I travel around the state listening to so that I can talk with Montanans to find out what's on Montanans' mind, because I don't believe that I can be an effective legislator if I don't know how Montanans feel about these issues. And that's really how I make my decisions, based on talking with Montanans, telephone calls that I receive from constituents throughout the week and the month, and then telephone conversations like this. So I'm glad you like it, and I'll I'll address this issue with Senator Tester when I see him next week. Thanks, Bob.
Our next question comes from Jeannie in Missoula. Jeannie, you are live on the line with Senator Walsh.
Hello. This is my second one as well, and I am glad that you do them. After the first one, the question I asked you, I ended up getting a call back from Senator Tester. My concern is, my father was in Korea. He was an air traffic controller on the front in Nam. He was awarded the Bronze Star. I've been a Democrat all my life, and I believe what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. And I injured myself in 2004. The state of Montana Workman's Comp settled out with me, and one of the conditions was they would take care of my back until I have cancer now. I came down with a rare cancer. I did not hear from the Montana Workman's Comp for 7 years. I came down with a rare cancer. They called me while I was going through radiation to the base of my stem, my brain stem. They called me in to see a doctor I'd never heard of. I wasn't even in his office 5 minutes, and I walked out of there, and suddenly there was nothing wrong with my back, and they were no longer going to pay for my back, and they were no longer going to pay for the services that Medicaid is unable to take care of. And
well, Jeannie, let me tell you what. I'm really sorry that you have had to deal with this, and I think that I could probably deal better with this on a personal basis. So how about if I give you a call, and I'll have myself and my staff will follow up with you to see what we can do to be helpful. Would that be okay?
My niece is a judge in Boston, and it wasn't until I talked to her. Senator Tester told me it was federal. My niece told me honky-tonk. She didn't quite use those words, but it's the state of Montana. It's not federal. And
I will have my staff work with the State Department of Public Health and Human Services, and we will be in contact with you so that we can get this problem solved.
Thank you very much, Senator Walsh. Our next question comes from Mike in Great Falls. Go ahead, Mike.
Good evening, Senator. I come to you as a person with a traumatic brain injury by way of some grand mal seizures. Traumatic brain injury is a signature issue. The signature injury of people coming home from Iraq. My question is twofold. Why are we in Iraq exposing our kids to this? And B, would you be willing to trade places with any veteran who has a traumatic brain injury for a month?
Well, Mike, first of all, let me tell you that I spent 33 years in the Montana National Guard, and I commanded an infantry battalion in Iraq in 2004 and 2005, where I took over 700 of Montana's finest young men and women with me into a combat. And then while I was serving as Montana's Adjutant General, every day that I was in that capacity, I had men and women that were deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. And while I was commanding the unit in Iraq, I lost 4 of my soldiers. And then when I came home, one of my young soldiers died by suicide. Today, we are losing 22 veterans a day to suicide. So I can tell you that veterans issues and the care that our veterans receive is very important to me. It's my number one priority that I've been working on while serving in the United States Senate. I'm so sorry that you have to deal with this. I want to bring our men and women home from Iraq. The last thing I ever want to do is to put our American service members in Iraq or Afghanistan. I've written letters to the president asking that our men and women be brought home from Afghanistan, that we don't extend the time frame of our men and women serving in Afghanistan. I believe it's time for the Afghanis, the Iraqis, the Syrians to stand up and take responsibility for securing their country so that we can bring our men and women home. Because these injuries that, like you know of, are difficult, and they not only on the service members, but they're difficult on the service member and their families and their employers. So these are issues that we are going to be dealing with, for a long time. And so again, I'm very sorry that you have to be dealing with a traumatic brain injury, but I want to make sure that none of our men and women have to be dealing with traumatic brain injury or PTSD. That's why I've been putting so much emphasis on legislation and getting legislation through the Congress to deal with these issues. I believe that our men and women, when they signed up to serve in our military, they were willing to give their lives for this country. And we need to make sure that this country is taking care of our men and women when they return home by making sure that the benefits or the benefits for our veterans, whether it's health care, jobs, education, retirement pay, is there for them when they need it. So again, Mike, I'm sorry that you're having to deal with a head injury, but I can tell you that I take this issue very seriously.
Thank you very much, Senator Walsh. Our next question comes from Corey in Butte. Corey, go ahead with your question for Senator Walsh. Corey, you are live on the line, and you can ask a question for Senator Walsh.
Good evening, Senator. Can you hear me?
Yes, Corey. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. First, thank you for your service to the country and as a senator. I went to Montana Tech here in Butte, and in 1977 we were talking about the Balkan and how much the oil supply was up there. At the same time, politicians, especially in the Democratic Party, and I'm from Butte and a solid Democrat, politicians, especially in the Democratic Party, were saying how the world would run out of oil by 2050, etc. I don't understand why all the professors up at Tech refused to say anything, even though they knew that it was a lie that was being told. And the reason was funding. If they said anything, funding to the college would be cut off. That's a terrible deal. Now we've got the same thing going right now with global warming. Anytime you get someone who's talking to you about carbon sequestration or global warming, ask what % of the global warming is caused by greenhouse gases. If you get someone truthful and they start talking about 1/10 millionth of 1% or 1/1,000,000th of 1%, then you can talk to them. But otherwise, they will avoid all numbers. It's just essentially a scam. And your president is using it against the American people. There are people in the Maldive Islands who can't read English, can't read Arabic, in fact, can't read at all. They live their whole lives on boats. But they know that those evil Americans are causing global warming that's causing the ocean to rise.
Okay, Corey, well, let's give Senator Walsh an opportunity to answer your question. Thank you very much for that question, Senator Walsh. I'd love to hear your response.
All right. Well, Corey, on this one, I do have to disagree with you a little bit. I believe that climate change is a serious problem that is jeopardizing our outdoor heritage in Montana. You know, this summer we were fairly lucky in regards of moisture, but on average, the last couple of decades, our wildfires have gotten more intense and much longer. And I believe that this is just one effect of climate change. You know, this is something that I believe if we don't get a handle on it, and I do believe we have the ability to get a handle on it, but we have to invest in research and technology and to come up with ways to make sure that, you know, if we're going to continue to burn coal, that we burn it as clean as we possibly can. That's why I've introduced legislation. It's called the 10 by 10 bill, that we develop 10 carbon sequestration sites over the next 10 years, and then we can become a leader in in the development of carbon sequestration, and then providing that to other countries. So, I do believe that climate change is real, and if we don't take care of it, you know, it's going to impact future generations much, much more. You know, agriculture and tourism rely on stable precipitation and temperature, and reducing carbon emissions doesn't mean shutting down our energy production. I just think we need more investment in research and technology so that we don't have to do that. I think we can have both. Well, again, I want to thank everybody for being on the call this evening. Thank you for the discussion. It's good for me, and I know that it helps me to do the important work that I do on behalf of Montanans. And it's always good to hear directly from people in Montana. Everywhere I go in Montana, I hear from folks like you that we spoke with tonight, asking me to make responsible decisions and to help us create jobs, protect our freedoms, and to hold Washington accountable. And definitely to cut the wasteful government spending that's going on back here in Washington. And thanks to your ideas, your questions, and your suggestions, the best part of my job is hearing directly from Montanans. So again, if you have any questions or additional comments, please feel free to give my office a call. Our telephone number is 657-6790, and you can also send me an email by going to my website at www.walsh.senate.gov. Thanks again for your time, and be in touch. Take care.